My name is Emily Whitlow. I am 22. And I found out what my parents really thought of me from a postpartum recovery room on the 3rd floor of Mission Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. 4 days earlier, I had given birth to my son, Holden, by emergency C-section. And then I had hemorrhaged on the table. And the surgeon had spent 46 minutes packing the inside of me with sterile gauze and praying out loud, which I had not known surgeons were allowed to do. Holden had spent 96 hours in the NICU because his oxygen had not stabilized for the first 11 minutes of his life. On the morning of his discharge, the NICU nurse wheeled him into my recovery room in a clear bassinet, and the floor nurse handed me a clipboard with discharge papers. And a social worker named Daphne stood at the foot of the bed and asked me, very gently, who would be helping me carry my son home that afternoon. My husband Levi was 920 miles away in Boston, on a bridge inspection contract that had been moved up by 3 days because of a storm advisory. And he could not be in Asheville before 11 that night. So I called my father. My father, Curtis Hayes, 64 years old, retired schoolteacher, lived in a brick rancher in Black Mountain, 23 minutes from Mission Hospital. He answered on the 3rd ring. I could hear my mother in the kitchen behind him, and I could hear my niece's voice, my sister Bryn's older daughter Kennedy, asking for juice. Daddy, I said. Mama, can you come up to Mission to help me bring Holden home? I am too weak to lift him and the car seat is too heavy with the stitches. Just for an hour. My father did not pause. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask how the baby was. He said, in the same flat schoolteacher voice he had used with 7th graders for 31 years. We're too busy today. Your sister's family is coming over for Sunday lunch. We made a commitment 3 weeks ago. The girls haven't seen us. You'll figure it out, you always do. I heard my mother in the background. Curtis. Honey. Maybe we should. My father did not turn the phone away. He said, loud enough for me to hear it. She's fine. Em's always fine. I said, Daddy. Please. Just 1 hour. My father said, Brian made plans. We are not going to disappoint our other granddaughters because Emily had a bad week. And he hung up. I lay in the bed and looked at the bassinet beside it. Holden was asleep on his back, one fist against his cheek, wearing the hospital-issue striped beanie they put on every newborn in the NICU. The skin under his eyes was still slightly yellow from the jaundice phototherapy. He was 4 days old. I had bled out on a table for him on Wednesday, and my father had just told me that a Sunday lunch with my sister's 2 daughters outranked driving me and a 4-day-old infant home from a hospital. I did not cry. I want you to understand that part, because everyone expects the woman in the recovery bed to fall apart. And I did not. I looked at the IV bruise blooming under the tape on the back of my left hand. Then I reached over with my right hand and picked up my phone off the rolling tray table. I had a great deal to take care of, and I was very good at taking care of things. That had always been the problem. You should know who I was before that morning, because it explains why my family treated me the way a thermostat treats a room. I grew up in a single-wide trailer outside Old Fort, North Carolina. On a gravel lot, my parents leased from a Baptist deacon named Eubanks for $200 a month. My father taught middle school social studies at McDowell County and worked weekends as a substitute referee for high school football. My mother was a school cafeteria aide. My younger sister Bryn was the planned one. The pretty one. The one for whom my mother kept a baby book. I was the surprise. Born 4 years before they had been ready. In a year when the boiler in the trailer had broken and my mother had spent the winter heating bottles on a hot plate. I worked the deli counter at an Ingalls in Black Mountain through high school. I paid for community college at Asheville Buncombe Tech by waitressing at a Cracker Barrel on the side. Then I transferred on scholarship to Western Carolina University's nursing program. By 28. I had passed my boards as a nurse practitioner specializing in postpartum and neonatal care at Mission Hospital, the same hospital I was lying in now. I was the person they put in the room when a new mother was hemorrhaging at 4 a.m, and the on-call OB had not yet made it from her house in Weaverville. I read clinical signs for a living. Numbers in color and breath rate do not have favorites, and they do not lie to your face. Which is more than I could say for some people. Levi and I married at 27 and decided to wait on kids partly because we wanted to, and partly because there was always something my family needed first. We lived below our means in a quiet way nobody noticed. 2 incomes. On a used Subaru. No debt. That is the only reason what I am about to tell you was even possible. For 7 years, I had been sending my parents $3,200 a month. I never said the number out loud. Not to my husband. Not to my sister. Not to a soul. I told myself it was for my father's blood pressure medication and my mother's knee surgery and the small mortgage they had taken out in 2018 on a house in a development off Highway 70. I told myself I was the only one steady enough to carry it. And being the steady one had become its own kind of identity. I am telling you this now so you understand. I was not naive. I was responsible to the point of self-erasure. There is a difference. And on the morning of Holden's discharge, in a third-floor recovery room at Mission Hospital, I finally learned what the difference was. The first thing I did was not revenge. The first thing I did was solve the actual problem. Because that is what I do. With my right thumb, I pulled up my contacts and found the number for an old classmate from the WCU nursing program. Imani Lawson. Imani had finished her RN 3 years after me and had gone into private postpartum care after losing her own mother to preeclampsia. She ran a small private agency out of West Asheville with 2 other nurses. She picked up on the second ring. Are you okay? I told her my name, my situation, and my address in 7 sentences. Calm as a Tuesday. Imani. I need a postpartum caregiver to bring me and a 4-day-old home from Mission this afternoon. Stay overnight. And come back tomorrow until my husband flies in. I am the patient. C-section. Hemorrhage on Wednesday. Baby is stable. Just discharged from NICU. The house is unlocked. Code 6421. There is formula in the pantry. Imani did not blink. Imani had heard worse. I'm coming myself. I'll be there at 1. I'll drive you home in my car. Levi can pick up the Subaru tomorrow. What time is discharge, I told her? 2:30. She said, I'll be at the 3rd floor desk at 12:45. She hung up. Daphne, the social worker at the foot of my bed, watched me set the phone down and asked gently if I needed her to call anyone else from my family. It's handled. I said, next. Daphne blinked. People always blink when you do not perform the breakdown they are braced for. I was not being cold. I was triaging the way you do when you have spent your whole life being the only adult in a room full of adults. My son was safe and warm and a few feet from me. My husband was on the next flight out of Logan. My stitches would heal. There was exactly 1 item left on the list that morning. One I had carried for 7 years and never once allowed myself to touch. And now my right hand was free. And my mind was very clear. I opened my banking app. The login screen glowed against the white wall of the recovery room like a small cold moon. Inside the app, on the 3rd screen down, there is a section called Scheduled Transfers. And I had 4 of them. I knew them by heart the way you know a scar. The first was labeled Mom and Dad Household, $1. Wu Bei. The second said Dad Medical, $1. Ling Ling Ling. The third said Mom Knee, PT, $400. The fourth, the one I had set up 4 years ago and never named clearly, said only Family Support, $300. $3,200 on the first of every month. For 84 months. I had set the first one up at 25 years old. The night my father called me from the kitchen of the trailer in Old Fort and told me he had been put on a forced early retirement because of his blood pressure, and that he and my mother were going to lose the lease unless someone helped them put a down payment on a small house. I had set the fourth one up at 28. After my mother told me Bryn was struggling to get her real estate license launched and the family needed just a little more breathing room while your sister gets on her feet. Bryn had gotten her license. Bryn had then bought a 4-bedroom in Hendersonville last spring. Bryn drove Alexus RX. I had not let myself add up the total. I had carefully not added up the total. So I made myself look. The app did the math without flinching. $268,800. More than $250,000. Gone out of my life, one quiet automated transfer at a time. While my father told the men at the Baptist men's breakfast that Diane and I are getting by on the Lord's provision, I pressed cancel on the first transfer. A pale green checkmark appeared, and a single line of text I will remember until I die. Recurring transfer canceled. I pressed cancel on the second. Recurring transfer canceled. The third. The fourth. 4 taps. Maybe 17 seconds. And 7 years simply stopped. The way a faucet stops when you turn the handle all the way to the right. I felt no triumph. I felt no grief. I felt a strange, flat clarity. The way a clinical assessment finally clicks when the numbers align. Then, as I was about to close the app, my eyes caught on something in the transaction history I had never bothered to scroll into before. A line item. 16 months back. Buried under the DAD medical label. It read, lump payment B $180. Ling ling ling. My sister's initial, not my father's medical. Brine. I locked the phone screen and laid it on the blanket. Holden made a small wet sound in his sleep, the half-cry. Half-coo of a newborn finding his thumb. I made myself sit. In the dim recovery room with the bassinet humming and the IV drip clicking against the metal pole, with the question I had avoided for 7 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer. The one strangers offer in comment sections is that I was a pushover, desperate for parental love. That answer is wrong. And, if you have ever been the dependable one, you already know why. I did it because somewhere along the way, I had decided that being needed was the same as being safe. If I was the load-bearing wall, no one could remove me from the family. I was buying my place in my own house, one direct deposit at a time. My grandfather understood that about me before I did. His name is Wesley Hayes, my father's father. Not my mother's, and he is 87 years old. A man who served 4 years in the Marines in Korea, ran a small auto body shop in Old Fort from 1962 until 2003, and has not raised his voice once in the 8 decades he has been on this earth. Wesley still lives. 8 months a year. In the brick rancher he built with his own hands in 1969 on 20 acres outside Old Fort. The other 4 months a year. Since my grandmother Marguerite passed in April of last year, he stays in the guest cottage he built behind his daughter-in-law's empty pottery studio in Cherokee County. The summer before I got married, Wesley took me out to his front porch and handed me a mason jar of sweet tea with bourbon in it that I have never told my husband about. And he said, girl, somebody in this family is going to have to be the break. Your daddy can't. And your sister won't. So it'll have to be you." I had thought he meant be careful with your money. I think now, lying in that recovery room, with the bank app still open under my thumb, that he had meant something much more specific. He had meant, don't let them drain you. Child. My grandmother Marguerite. Wesley's wife of 61 years had passed in April of last year. 3 months before Holden was conceived, she had gone slowly. From a kidney disease. She had been hiding for 2 years, so she could keep painting at the pottery studio Wesley had built her in Cherokee County. The week before she died, Marguerite had asked me to drive out to the cottage to bring her one specific apple from the tree at Wesley's place, a Granny Smith from the lowest branch, and when I had brought it to her, she had not eaten it. She had pressed a small white envelope into my hand instead. She had said only, "For you, M. Not for him. Don't open it until you really need it." I had not opened the envelope. I had put it in the lockbox at my house, behind the deed to our condo and our 2 passports. And I had not thought about it again until that morning. Lying in the recovery room with the bank app glowing on my thigh, I made a note in my head. I would open the envelope when I got home. Levi called from a layover at Reagan National around 11. "M. Talk to me. Are you okay?" I told him about Imani. I told him about the discharge. I told him about my father. Levi was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, in the careful flat voice he uses when he is angry but does not want me to absorb the anger, "M. I am so sorry. Your dad actually said that I told him exactly what Curtis had said." Levi said, "And your mom, I told him what I had heard my mother start to say. And what Curtis had cut off." Levi said, "M. I will be there by midnight. Do not move from that bed until Imani gets you. And one more thing." I waited. He said, "Whatever you decide to do, I am with you. You hear me? Whatever you decide." I told him I heard him. After we hung up, I lay in the bed with the bank app still locked and the 4 transfers still canceled. And I waited. I knew my parents. They would discover the missing deposit on the 1st of the month, 11 days from now. And my father would call. And his voice would be sharp at the start because that was his only way. I had 11 days to be ready. I would be ready. What I did not know, what I could not have known at 9:47 a.m. on that Sunday morning in that postpartum recovery room, was that my grandfather Wesley Hayes had been in the kitchen of his brick rancher outside Old Fort since 5:30 a.m. drinking coffee out of the same chipped mug Marguerite had thrown for him on a pottery wheel in 1978, listening to a Cardinals game on AM radio, and that at 9:10 a.m. His phone had rung with my mother Diane's name on the screen. My mother almost never called Wesley. My mother had not been comfortable around Wesley for 34 years. Ever since Wesley had quietly told Curtis, the night before Curtis and Diane's wedding in 1990, that he thought Diane was a fine young woman, but Curtis ought to make sure he was marrying her for her, and not for the size of her father's tobacco settlement. Diane had never quite forgiven Wesley for that conversation. And Wesley had never quite forgiven himself for being right. But on that Sunday morning, my mother had called him from the laundry room of her own house, with the door shut and the dryer running for cover. She had told him, very quickly, in the 4 minutes she had before Curtis came looking, that Emily was at Mission Hospital, that Emily had hemorrhaged on Wednesday, that Holden had been in the NICU, that they were both being discharged today, that Levi was in Boston, and that Curtis had refused to drive up to help her. Wesley had listened in silence. Then he had asked one question. "Diane, did Curtis say it the way he says everything, or did he say it worse?" My mother had paused. Then she had told the truth. Because she could not lie to Wesley. "He said your other granddaughters had not seen us in 3 weeks. He said M is always fine." Wesley had said, "All right, Diane," and he had hung up. Wesley had then sat at his kitchen table for about 11 minutes. He had looked at the ceramic mug Marguerite had thrown. He had looked at the photograph of Marguerite on the kitchen windowsill, the one from their 50th anniversary in 2013, when she was wearing the blue silk blouse he had bought her in Charleston. He had thought about what Marguerite had said to him at her bedside in April last year, the morning before she passed. when the hospice nurse had stepped outside and the morphine had not yet pulled her under, and he had thought about a manila folder in a fireproof box on the top shelf of his bedroom closet, a folder he had not opened in 11 months. He had stood up, slowly. Because of his right hip, he had gone to the bedroom. He had put on a clean denim shirt and the gray suit jacket he had worn to Marguerite's funeral. He had taken the folder out of the fireproof box. He had picked up his cane. He had gotten into the 1998 Ford Bronco he had owned since the year before I was born. The truck that smelled like cedarwood and Old Spice and 1,000 small auto body parts, and he had driven the 41 miles from Old Fort to Mission Hospital in Asheville, with the folder on the passenger seat and the radio off. He arrived at the front desk of the postpartum unit at exactly 1:38 p.m. As Imani Lawson was helping me into a wheelchair beside the hospital bed and a nurse was buckling Holden into the infant carrier I would not have been able to lift alone, Wesley walked up to the desk. The desk clerk asked if he was family. Wesley looked at her over his reading glasses, the way an old man looks at a young person who is trying to do her job, and he said gently, "I'm what's left of it." Wesley walked through the door of my recovery room at 1:41 p.m. with the manila folder under his left arm and his cane in his right hand. He did not say hello. He did not ask if I was okay. He looked at Imani, who was lacing the strap of the infant carrier, and he nodded at her like he had known her 30 years, even though they had never met. He looked at Holden in the carrier. He looked at me in the wheelchair. He set the folder on the bed beside my discharge paperwork. He put his big calloused hand over my left hand, where the IV tape was still pulling at the skin. "Girl," he said. "Where is your husband?" I told him about Logan. About Reagan. About the midnight ETA. Wesley nodded once. "Then we are doing this together. You and me. And this nurse. I will follow you home. I will sit with Imani tonight until Levi gets there. Then I will go back to Old Fort tomorrow." I tried to say something about the drive. Wesley said, I drove this same road every Sunday for 6 years to see your grandmother in the hospital before she came home on hospice. Do not tell me about the drive." He did not open the folder that afternoon. He carried it under his arm out of the postpartum unit. He carried it under his arm into the elevator. He carried it under his arm to the lobby. Imani drove Holden and me to our condo on Charlotte Street in her Toyota 4Runner. Wesley followed in the 1998 Ford Bronco. When we got home, Wesley brought the folder into my house, set it on the bookshelf in the living room next to a framed photograph of Marguerite at the pottery wheel, and did not touch it again that night. He sat on the couch with a cup of decaf and watched Holden sleep on Imani's chest for 3 hours. And at 11:40 p.m., when Levi's lift from the Asheville airport finally pulled into the driveway, Wesley shook Levi's hand at the front door without saying anything, kissed me on the top of the head, told Imani to call him if I had a fever, and drove back to Old Fort. The folder stayed on the bookshelf for 11 days. I did not open it. I want to skip forward, because the next 2 weeks are where the real work happened. And most of it happened on the couch in my own living room with an ice pack on my abdomen and Holden asleep on a boppy pillow against my left thigh. 3 days after I came home, I called Levi's older sister, Marin. Marin is a forensic accountant for a regional firm in Charlotte. Marin is the kind of person you want on your side when you have just discovered that $250,000 has gone somewhere it should not have. Marin drove up to Asheville the following Saturday with a duffel bag. At an espresso machine she did not trust me to have, and a portable printer she had bought specifically for this trip at the Best Buy off Tunnel Road. "You and I are going to do some bookkeeping," she told me. We did. While Imani fed Holden and rocked him on the front porch in the unseasonably warm October sun, Marin and I logged into my bank, exported 84 months of statements, and dropped them into a pivot table. This is what I do, more or less. when I read a patient's chart and try to figure out which of the 17 numbers on the screen is the one that is going to kill her. I can certainly do it for my own life. I sorted the $268,800 by where it had actually landed. I filtered by date, by payee, by withdrawal location, and by category code. I cross-referenced every transfer with the corresponding withdrawal on my parents' joint account, which I had access to as a secondary user, a status my mother had added me to in 2018 when she had needed help fighting a fraudulent charge from a phishing email and had simply forgotten to remove me afterward. The picture that assembled itself, cell by cell, was not the picture my father had painted at the Baptist men's breakfast for the last 7 years. The medical expenses I had thought I was covering my father's blood pressure prescription, my mother's knee surgery in 2019. The gap between Medicare and the supplemental came to about $3,100 total. $3,100 out of $268,000. The mortgage I thought I was helping with had been paid 4 times in 7 years, not 84. 4. So where had the other $262,000 gone? I filtered by withdrawal destination. I followed the receipts. I cross-checked with the deeds in Buncombe and Henderson County, both of which are public record. And the picture lit up. $180,000 had been wired in a single transaction in March of last year from my father's account to a closing attorney in Hendersonville named Royston Bell. The closing was on a 4-bedroom house on a cul-de-sac off Cayuga Road. The buyer on the deed was Bryn Hayes Calloway and Dustin Calloway, husband and wife. Tenants by the entirety. My sister had bought a house with my down payment. And my father had never told me. And my sister had thrown a housewarming on a Saturday in July, to which I had not been invited because the dining room is too small for everyone, and Bryn wanted to keep it intimate. $45,000 had been wired in 9 separate transactions over the previous 28 months to an LLC registered with the North Carolina Secretary of State as Hayes Calloway Realty, LLC. That was the brokerage my sister had started in 2022. The brokerage, she had told the family, she had bootstrapped with savings from her wedding fund and a small loan from her in-laws. My in-laws by marriage, by the way, had never loaned my sister $1. I checked. Marin checked. The Calloways were a quiet, decent family from a paper mill town in eastern Tennessee. And they did not have $45,000 to give my sister. And they would not have hidden it inside my father's checking account if they had. $40,000 had gone. In 2 transactions, in 2021, to a small startup in Greenville, South Carolina, called Vanguard Asset Strategies. Vanguard Asset Strategies was an investment fund operated by a former co-worker of my father's named Donnie Pruitt, who had taught American history at the same middle school in McDowell County until 2014. When he had been quietly let go for reasons no one ever explained at the school board meeting, Vanguard Asset Strategies had filed for bankruptcy in 2023. My father had not recovered 1 cent. I sat back against the couch, as far as the C-section stitches allowed, and let the numbers say it. Because numbers, unlike my family, had never once lied to me. I am going to give you the exact numbers. Because I want you holding them the way I held them. Because everything after this turns on them. Out of $268,800, $3,100 could be matched to my father's real medical care. Approximately $12,000 had touched the mortgage and the utilities. That left $253,700 unaccounted for. And it split into 3 rivers. The first river, $180,000. The down payment on Bryn's house. The second river, $45,000. The seed funding for Bryn's brokerage. The third river, $40,000. The failed investment with my father's former co-worker, $265,000. Total had been moved by my parents into things I had not consented to fund and could not have approved of. I printed the summary to a single page on Marin's portable printer. One clean sheet. The whole 7 years in 12 rows. Then Marin showed me one more thing. She had been scrolling the Hayes family relatives chat, a group text my mother had set up in 2020 for important family updates, and she screenshotted a message my father had sent to my Uncle Marcus 8 months ago. Before any of this, Diane and I are managing on what God provides. We don't take handouts from anybody. The Lord has been faithful. I looked at that screenshot. And I looked at my one printed page. And something in me went very quiet and very level. I was not going to send an angry text. I was not going to explain or defend. I was going to let the paper into the room, in front of the same audience my father had been performing for 7 years. And then I was going to walk out and never fund the show again. It's handled, I said to Marin. And for the first time, the words felt less like triage and more like a verdict. My parents discovered the transfers had stopped the way they discovered everything when it cost them. The first of the month came. No deposit landed. By 11 a.m. My phone was ringing with my mother's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice. The third time I answered, because avoidance was the old me. And the new me had a C-section scar and a spreadsheet. My mother's voice came through warm as a pan of cornbread. Sweetheart, I have been worried sick. How is Holden? How are those stitches? Worried sick. The woman who had wanted to call but had let Curtis cut her off. I told her I was recovering. I told her Holden was nursing well. I told her Levi was working from home for 2 more weeks. Well, that is just a blessing, my mother said. There was a pause while she repositioned. Honey, I do not know if you know this, but the bank deposit did not come through this morning. I just wanted to check in with you in case there was a mix-up at the bank. I know you have so much going on. I told her it was not a mix-up. Silence. Then I heard her hand the phone to my father. Curtis came on the line. His voice was no longer warm. Emily Lynette Hayes Whitlow. What in the world do you think you are doing? I told my father I had canceled the recurring transfers. He started to talk. He talked for almost 3 minutes without taking a breath. He told me how much he had sacrificed. He told me how he had refereed weekend football games to put me through Asheville Buncombe Tech. He told me how he had given up a fishing camp in Tennessee in 2017 so they could put a roof over my head. He had not put a roof over my head since I had moved out at 19 He told me my mother needed her medication. He told me he had a procedure scheduled. He told me how disappointed he was. He let me run out of patience the way I had let my mother run out of guilt. And then, just like in every family argument we had ever had, he circled back to the one weapon that had never failed him. Your sister never has these problems. Bryn finds a way. Bryn does not punish her parents. And there it was. The third time I had heard a version of that sentence in 2 weeks. Except this time, I did not flinch. And I did not explain. I simply said, I know, Daddy. And let those 3 words mean something he had not intended. Bryn never had these problems, because Bryn had me. And now Bryn had a 4-bedroom in Hendersonville that she could not actually afford on her own, and a brokerage that was running on capital that had just stopped flowing. I told my father I had to feed the baby. And I hung up while he was still talking, which I had not done once in 32 years. When the father fails, he sends the aunt. That afternoon, my mother's older sister, Aunt Loretta, texted me directly. Loretta is 68 years old, lives in a brick split level in Marion, North Carolina, with her husband Phil and a schnauzer named Buster. Loretta had texted me maybe 6 times in my adult life. 3 of those times had been to ask me to donate to a youth ministry fundraiser at her church. Her message was a paragraph of borrowed outrage. Emily, I am beside myself. Your daddy called me in tears. Your parents are barely getting by. And you cut them off when your daddy has a procedure coming up. Your grandmother Marguerite, may she rest in peace, would be so disappointed in you. Family takes care of family. You need to do the right thing here. I read it twice. The line about Marguerite almost got me. Because Marguerite was the one person in that family I had not wanted to disappoint. Then I remembered Marguerite's actual envelope, sitting in the lockbox at my house. The envelope I had opened on the morning after I came home from the hospital. Inside the envelope had been a card and a check for $1,000 and a single note in Marguerite's careful Palmer method handwriting. Emin. The money is for the baby. Not for him. Not for Brian. Wesley has the rest. Loretta had it exactly backwards. So I did not write a paragraph back. I did not defend myself. I did not cry or apologize. I attached the single-page Marin, and I had printed at the kitchen table, the one with 12 rows and 84 months on it, and I typed one sentence beneath it. Aunt Loretta here is where the money my father says he manages on his own actually went. The Hendersonville house deposit and the brokerage line items are Bryn's ATM. The rest, you will see for yourself. Ask him. I put the phone down. Holden was nursing. Levi was holding a cup of coffee at the kitchen counter. Watching me. Not interrupting. The phone buzzed once, the little ellipsis of Loretta typing. Then it stopped. Then nothing. No reply came. Not that hour. Not that day. I imagined Loretta sitting in her kitchen in Marion reading 12 rows of numbers she could not argue with. Because that is the thing about a spreadsheet. You can call a person dramatic. You cannot call a column of withdrawals dramatic. It simply sits there being true. I had spent my whole life managing my father's pride and my mother's worry and my sister's jealousy and the family's expectations. And it had never once occurred to me that the kindest, hardest thing I could do was hand them a fact and let them sit with it alone. I want to stop here for a moment. Because if you have made it this far, you may be the person I am about to describe. I spent 7 years believing I was paying for my father's blood pressure medication and my mother's knee surgery. And I was actually paying for my sister's house and a brokerage I had not been invited to fund. If you have ever wired money on faith, pull one statement tonight. Just one. Cross-reference it with what the recipient told you it was for. Read it like it does not belong to you. If you do not have the password to your own parents' account because you trust them to manage what you sent, that is not love. That is religion. And if this is hitting close to home, subscribe, because the next part is where my grandfather sits down in my father's living room and makes one phone call. And what he said into the phone broke something open in my family that no amount of we manage on our own could ever put back together. My father is many things, but he is never out of moves. When the warmth failed and the aunt failed, he reached for the one stage he could still control. He called a family dinner. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. As a group text to the entire Hayes Calloway Pruitt chain, framed in his best wounded patriarch register. Family. Diane and I would like to invite everyone over Sunday at 5 for an early supper to welcome baby Holden properly and clear the air as a family. Emily. Sweetheart. I hope you and Levi will come and we can put this misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. 13 days after he told me he was too busy to drive 23 minutes to help a 4-day-old come home from a hospital. It was a misunderstanding. Levi read the text over my shoulder and said, You don't have to go. We do not have to give him this stage. I told Levi I wanted to go. I told him I wanted to go because my father had spent 7 years performing a story about himself and about me and our family for the same audience Aunt Loretta and Uncle Phil and my mother's cousin Sharon and my father's brother Marcus and Bryn and Dustin and their 2 daughters Kennedy and Lila, and the only place to end the performance was on the same stage. Levi said, Are you bringing Holden? I told him I was bringing Holden not as a prop, but because he was 19 days old, he was nursing every 2 hours. And that was a fact that did not bend around my father's living room schedule. I called Wesley that evening. I had not yet opened the folder Wesley had left on my bookshelf. The folder had sat there for 13 days. I had carried Holden past it 100 times. I had not touched it. Wesley picked up on the second ring. Girl." I told him about the dinner. I told him my father had called it for Sunday. Wesley was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Have you opened my folder yet?" I told him I had not. Wesley said, "All right. Don't. I would like to bring it Sunday and open it there. Is that all right with you?" I told him it was. He said, "I will pick you up at 4. I will drive. You do not need to be lifting that carrier with fresh stitches." He paused. "And do not tell your daddy I am coming. Do not tell your mama. Let me walk in on my own." The morning of the dinner, I dressed Holden in a soft cotton sleeper with a tiny embroidered acorn on the chest. Marguerite had sent me the sleeper 2 months before she passed, with a card that said only for the new one. "When he comes, I packed his diaper bag 4 bottles, 6 diapers, 2 changes of clothes, the boppy pillow, the soft blue muslin Marguerite had quilted for him a year before she knew he existed. I tucked 1 folded sheet of paper into the side pocket. 12 rows. 84 months. The page Marin and I had printed. I dressed myself in a charcoal sweater dress that did not press on the incision, and I put on the small gold studs Wesley had given me for my high school graduation. Levi drove our Subaru behind Wesley's Ford Bronco. Wesley picked me up at 4 sharp. As he had said, he was wearing a clean denim shirt and the gray suit jacket he had worn to Marguerite's funeral. The folder was on the back seat, on top of the car seat base, where Holden would ride. Wesley moved it to the floorboard so we could buckle Holden in. He did not say much on the drive. He turned the radio on low to WCQS, the Asheville public radio station, which was playing a Lyle Lovett record. Wesley listened for about 2 minutes and turned it off. Girl," he said, eyes on the road that wound out of Asheville toward Black Mountain. "I want you to remember something. Whatever happens at this dinner, you are not the one creating the trouble. You are the one finally naming it. There is a difference. Your grandmother understood that. I want you to remember she understood it." I told him I would remember. We pulled into my parents' driveway at 4:58 p.m. The yard was already full. Aunt Loretta's white Buick, Uncle Phil's pickup, Sharon's CRB, Uncle Marcus's old Tundra, which had surprised me. I had not seen Marcus at a Hayes family event in 4 years, and my sister Brian's Lexus RX, which I noticed had a fresh scratch on the back passenger door. Wesley killed the engine. He sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. Then he turned to me. Girl, I love you. Your grandma loved you. Whatever your daddy says in there, you remember that. I want you to walk in ahead of me with that baby. I want them to see his face before they see anything else. I will come in behind you with the folder." I asked him what was in the folder. Wesley said, Girl, I am going to ask you to trust me one more time, just like Marguerite asked you to trust her with that envelope. Can you do that?" I told him I could. He squeezed my hand. He picked up the folder. Levi got Holden's car seat out of the Subaru. The 3 of us walked up the path to my parents' front door, me with the incision still tender under my sweater dress, Levi with Holden asleep in his carrier, and my grandfather Wesley Hayes, 87 years old, in his denim shirt and his funeral jacket, with a manila folder under his arm that contained the document my grandmother Marguerite had spent the last 10 months of her life preparing, and that I would not understand the full meaning of for another 46 minutes. I rang the doorbell. My father's voice called out, "Come in." "Sweetheart." The door's open. I turned the knob. We walked in. The first thing I saw when I stepped inside my parents' house was my father, standing in the front hall with a tea towel over his shoulder. Wearing the navy cardigan my mother had bought him at Belk for his 63rd birthday. He had styled what was left of his hair. He had put on a clean button-down. He had set the stage. Behind him, in the living room, the audience was already seated. Aunt Loretta on the love seat closest to the kitchen, Uncle Phil beside her with a glass of sweet tea, my mother's cousin Sharon perched on the edge of the recliner, my mother in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, drying her hands on a dish towel and not making eye contact with me. Uncle Marcus on the dining chair brought in from the kitchen, the only person in the room who looked up at me directly when I walked through the door. My sister Bryn on the leather ottoman in the center of the room, in a cream-colored cashmere sweater I had paid for and did not yet know it. Her two daughters, Kennedy and Lila, in the basement, watching a cartoon. Dustin, Bryn's husband, beside her with a Diet Coke. My father started to cross the hall toward me with his arms half open, the gesture he used to make at faculty assemblies. Then he saw Wesley behind me, and he stopped. Wesley had not been invited. Wesley was not on the group text. Wesley was 87 years old in a denim shirt and his funeral jacket, with a manila folder under his arm. And my father's face did the small, involuntary thing faces do when a man walks into a room you did not write a part for. "Daddy," my father said, recovering quickly. "What a wonderful surprise. We did not expect, please. Please come in. Diane. Look who's here." My mother looked up from the dish towel. She saw Wesley. She put one hand on the doorframe to steady herself. Wesley said only, "Curtis, Diane, I'd like a chair. Please." The straight one from the kitchen. "If it's all the same." Uncle Marcus stood up immediately and went to get the chair. Marcus brought it back and placed it 3 feet from the coffee table. In the open arc of the living room, facing the love seat, Wesley sat down. He set the folder on his lap. He hooked his cane on the chair back. He folded his hands on top of the folder. He did not say another word. Levi carried Holden's car seat across the room and set it gently on the carpet beside my chair. Holden was still asleep. The embroidered acorn on his sleeper was rising and falling with his small breath. I sat down on the upholstered chair my mother had pulled close to the coffee table. I left my coat on. I kept the diaper bag at my feet. My father sat down on the love seat next to Aunt Loretta. He patted Loretta's hand. Loretta did not pat his back, which I noticed, and my father did not. "Well?" my father said, brightening his voice. "I am so glad we are all together. This has been a hard month for our family. There have been some hurt feelings on both sides. And I would just like us to be able to sit down like grown-ups and clear the air." He looked at me. "Sweetheart, I want you to know your mama and I love you very much. We always have. And we love that beautiful baby boy. And whatever happened with the discharge from the hospital, whatever was said between you and your mama and me, I am sure there is an explanation. And I want us to be a family again." He paused. The way an experienced teacher pauses to let his audience supply the next emotion, Sharon made a small, sympathetic sound. Phil shifted in his seat. Loretta looked at her shoes. My mother did not move from the doorway. "You know," my father said, settling into his rhythm, "your mama and I have not had it easy. We did the best we could with what we had. We sent you girls to school. We kept a roof over your heads. We worked hard. And I think sometimes when you do everything for your children, they forget." He turned slightly. "The way you turn when you are addressing the room, and not the daughter. And I will say this. Em has always been the strong one. She landed on her feet. She got the scholarship. She got the nurse practitioner license. She has the beautiful condo, the husband, the new baby. And Bryn, poor Bryn. He reached across the room and patted Bryn's knee. Bryn has had to fight for everything. Her business, her marriage, her 2 little girls. And so sometimes your mama and I have to give a little more attention to the one who needs us more. Em has never seemed to need us. That is a compliment. He turned back to me with damp eyes. And I just do not understand where this cruelty is coming from. Your sister never has these problems. Sweetheart, your sister doesn't decide to punish her parents because she had a hard delivery. The 4th time, in a warm, crowded living room with 9 adults watching, my father handed me the exact sentence he had used to leave a 4-day-old infant in a hospital. And he had no idea. He had just loaded the weapon and passed it to me grip first. The room waited for me to cry. Or shout. Or crumble. I did none of those things. I reached into the side pocket of the diaper bag. Underneath the blue muslin quilt, Marguerite had stitched for Holden a year before he existed. And I took out 1 folded sheet of paper. I did not stand up and make a speech. The incision and the postpartum bleeding and the stitches would not have allowed it even if I had wanted to. I unfolded the page one-handed and smoothed it flat against my thigh. I set it on the coffee table in the center of the room, where the late October light from my mother's front window fell across it. Then I said, in the same level voice I used to walk a new mother through her postpartum discharge instructions, "You're right, Daddy. Bryn never has these problems. I'd like to show everyone in this room why." The room went very still. Loretta leaned forward despite herself. "This," I said, touching the top of the page, "is every dollar I have sent this household over the last 7 years. $268,800. 84 months. The top rows are the legitimate spending. $3,100 for Daddy's blood pressure prescription and Mama's knee copay, $12,000 toward this mortgage, and the utilities, about $15,000 total. Real medicine. Real bills. Real things I was proud to help with." I let that sit 1 beat. "The rest," I said, "is the part Daddy tells you all you manage, on your own." I touched the page lightly. $180,000 wired in March of last year to a closing attorney in Hendersonville named Royston Bell. That was the down payment on the 4-bedroom house on Cayuga Road. The buyers on the deed are Bryn and Dustin Calloway. A small sound went around the room. Aunt Loretta made a noise I had never heard her make. Sharon's hand came up to her mouth. Dustin set his Diet Coke down on the coaster very carefully. $45,000. I said. Wired in 9 separate transactions over 28 months to Hayes Calloway Realty, LLC. The brokerage Bryn told this family she bootstrapped from her wedding fund. Bryn's head came up very slowly. And $40,000. I said. Wired in 2 transactions in 2021 to Vanguard Asset Strategies in Greenville, South Carolina. The investment fund run by Daddy's former co-worker Donnie Pruitt. The fund that filed for bankruptcy in 2023. The fund Daddy never recovered a cent from and never told any of us about the Ming. Uncle Marcus made a low sound from the corner. Marcus had known Donnie Pruitt. Marcus had warned my father about Donnie Pruitt at a Christmas in 2020. Marcus had been told to mind his own business. "That's where your house came from, Bryn," I said gently, because none of this was her fault first. It came from me. The brokerage came from me. The Lexus payments came from me. It always came from me. Bryn's face did something I had never seen it do. The casual entitlement she had worn since she was 11 simply slid off, and underneath was a 28-year-old woman in a cashmere sweater she could not pay for. In a leased Lexus she could not pay for. In a house in Hendersonville she had been told her in-laws had helped buy. Dustin stood up. Dustin had been silent for 41 minutes. Dustin said, very quietly, "Bryn, "We need to talk in the kitchen." Bryn followed him. They did not come back. My father's performance had nowhere to go. The tears he had summoned for sympathy were now just water on a teacher's face caught in a full room with no audience left to convert. He opened his mouth. He got as far as, "M. That is twisted. You have twisted those numbers. Your sister had legitimate needs. The brokerage is none of your..." And that is when my grandfather set his cane against the table. The brittle rubber bands on the folder had to be coaxed off. They had been on it long enough to have left grooves in the manila. Wesley opened the folder with the unhurried hands of a man who had waited 11 months for this exact moment. "Curtis," he said, "please stop talking." My father stopped. Even my father. In 32 years of teaching middle school history to 7th graders who had not wanted to be there, I knew that Wesley Hayes saying "please" in that voice meant something. Wesley drew out a stapled document. It was thick. It was official. There was an Asheville law firm's embossed seal on the cover page. Vogel. "Cantrell, who?" He set the document on the coffee table beside my single page. He laid the two pieces of paper next to each other, the numbers and the trust. "This," Wesley said to the room, not to my father. "To the room is your grandmother Marguerite's trust, and mine. Last summer, before Marguerite got sick the last time. We sat down with our attorney Henrik Vogel, and we moved most of what we had into this trust. Marguerite was of sound mind. Her doctor signed an attestation on page 3. She had been planning this for 2 years before she did it. She had been watching." He paused. He looked at my father. His face had no cruelty in it. It had something worse. It had clarity. "Curtis, Marguerite had been watching what you did with the money M sent. She had her own bank and her own way of looking. Marguerite asked me a year before she passed to start keeping a record. So I did. Every check, every wire, every story you told the Baptist men's breakfast about how Diane and I, about how you and Diane manage on your own. Marguerite had me trace it the way she traced a quilt pattern. And what M said on this table just now is the same picture Marguerite and I had assembled in this folder. Except ours goes back 12 years instead of 7. He tapped the cover of the document. At the end, Marguerite asked me one thing. She asked me to make sure that whatever was left of our life's work did not end up in the same place. M's salary had been ending up for a decade. So Marguerite and I made a trust. The brick rancher and old fort, the 20 acres around it, the 200 acres of the family farm in Cherokee County your great-uncle Jim left us in 1991, the accounts, the small life insurance Marguerite had been paying on since 1986, every piece of it moves into the trust. And the trust has 2 beneficiaries. Wesley looked at me. Girl. And Holden. There is a fund for Holden's education that becomes available when he turns 18. The rest is in trust for you, payable in increments over your lifetime. In a way Marguerite was very particular about. Marguerite did not want you ever again in a position where you had to bring a 4-day-old home from a hospital alone because somebody had a Sunday lunch. So Marguerite and I made sure you wouldn't be. The room was silent. Wesley turned to my parents. "Curtis. Diane. The house you are sitting in sits on a half-acre your daddy bought from my brother in 2018. Your name is on the mortgage. Curtis. But Marguerite and I co-signed it from the beginning. We refinanced it in our names in 2020. With your written consent. Because the bank would not extend you a new loan after the Vanguard collapse. The house is in our trust. When Marguerite passed, it passed to M. In trust. With a lifetime occupancy clause for the 2 of you. You can live here for the rest of your natural lives. You will not be put out. But you do not own this house. You have not owned this house since April of last year. You have been living in your daughter's house. The same daughter you told was too busy to be helped on Sunday. My father's face did a thing I had never seen it do. The wounded patriarch mask simply fell off. and underneath was raw panic. Because the kingdom he ruled, the story he had told for 30 years at the Baptist men's breakfast, and to my mother's sister Loretta, and to his brother Marcus, and to every faculty meeting at McDowell Middle School, had just been handed in a stapled document with 2 signatures to the daughter he had left at a hospital discharge desk. The room did not look at me. The room looked at him. My father turned to my mother. Diane. Are you going to let them do this to me? This was our house too. This was your father-in-law, and our own daughter, ganging up to my mother, lifted her head. Her eyes were wet. But they were not the performance eyes my father used. They were the eyes of a woman who had spent 34 years not saying things and was finally about to. Curtis, she said quietly. He's not doing it to us. He's doing it for her. And I should have done it years ago. My father's head snapped toward her. The look he gave her was 34 years old. It was the look that had ended every dispute they had ever had. But my mother did not stop. She turned to me. I am so sorry. I am so sorry I didn't drive to the hospital. I am so sorry I didn't pick up the phone after Curtis hung up on you. I am so sorry I let your father tell me my place. I should have come. I should have come the moment I heard you bled out on a table. I should have come. She was crying now. But she was not asking me to do anything with the tears. She was just letting them happen. Mama, I said. That is the first true thing I have heard you say in 7 years. And that was when Wesley reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and took out his cell phone. The room watched him. Wesley did not stand up. He just dialed a number from his contacts slowly, with his big callous thumb, and put the phone to his ear. Henrik, he said. He said it once. Evenly. Henrik Vogel. In his home office in North Asheville. On a Sunday at 5:53 p.m. Picked up on the second ring. Wesley said, Henrik, activate it. Now. He listened for about 4 seconds. He said, Yes. I'm with the family. M is here. The room is here. Yes? The Hendersonville parcel too. Henrik. You do the Hendersonville parcel first. Bryn signed a promissory note in 2024. Pull it. Yes. Thank you. Henrik. He hung up. Wesley turned to the kitchen doorway, where Bryn had just walked back in with Dustin behind her. Bryn's mascara was running. Dustin's jaw was set. Wesley said, very gently, Brynje. Sit down. Brynsot. Wesley said, Henrik Vogel is going to call you tomorrow morning at 9 AWW. M. The down payment your daddy gave you for the Cayuga Roadhouse in March of last year was not a gift. Your daddy did not own that money. The money came from a trust. Your grandmother and I had been monitoring. Marguerite and Henrik had you sign a promissory note at the closing. You signed it as a routine document at the bottom of the closing packet. You never read it. Most people don't. The note says the down payment was a loan. $200,000. Principal and accrued interest. Payable to the trust. Henrik will offer you a structured repayment plan starting Monday. If you cannot meet the payments. The trust has a first lien position on the house. Henrik will explain everything tomorrow. I am sorry. Brynje. I am sorry it has to be this way. Bryn opened her mouth. No sound came out. Dustin put his hand on her shoulder. He looked at Wesley, then at me. He said only, Thank you for telling us. I would rather know. Wesley nodded at Dustin. He did not say anything else. Aunt Loretta finally let go of my father's hand. She stood up. She walked to the coffee table. She picked up my single page. She read it again. She looked at me. M. Loretta said, very quietly, I owe you an apology. I sent you a text last week. I will be retracting. To everyone. Then she looked at Phil. Phil. We are going home. Phil stood up immediately. Phil had not said a word in 46 minutes. Phil had heard enough. Uncle Marcus. In the corner. Did something I will remember the rest of my life. Marcus stood up. Marcus walked across the room. Marcus put one hand on Wesley's shoulder. The way one old man steadies another old man. Then Marcus walked to the coffee table, picked up my single page, and held it briefly in front of my father's face. Curtis, Marcus said, you owe Em an apology. You owe Marguerite an apology. You owe me one too. I warned you about Donnie Pruitt in 2020 and you told me to mind my own business. You will not get the first apology from me. You will not see me at Thanksgiving. Marcus set the page back on the table. Marcus nodded at Levi. Marcus walked out the front door. I gathered my page. Wesley gathered the trust document. I had one thing left to do. And it was the easiest thing of all. I stood slowly. Because the stitches still did not allow for drama even when the moment called for it. Levi picked up Holden's car seat. Holden had slept through the entire 46 minutes. I reached into the small zipper pocket of my purse and took out the soft gray hospital identification band I had worn for 5 days at mission. I had not been able to throw it away when the nurse had cut it off my wrist on the morning of my discharge. I had carried it home in my purse. I had not known why. I looped that small gray band once around the handle of Holden's car seat and let it rest there. A piece of proof I would see every time I carried my son. Not the bank app. Not the spreadsheet. Not the folder. That little band was the whole story. The morning I came home from a hospital alone with a 4-day-old, and my family chose a Sunday lunch. My father was still talking. Threats sliding into pleading now. Em. Please. We can fix this. Honey. We are still your parents. Holden is still my grandson. You are going to regret this when you are old. But his voice had stopped being able to reach me. The way a song stops when you finally leave the room, it has been playing in Fairy and Els. I turned to my mother. Mama. Henrik Vogel will be in touch with you separately. The trust has a provision for you. Independent of Daddy. If you ever decide to leave. My mother's eyes widened. She nodded once. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I turned to Aunt Loretta. Thank you for reading the numbers. Aunt Loretta. I know you will tell everyone the truth. It was not a threat. It was a fact. And she knew it. Loretta nodded. I turned to Bryn. Brynje. Read the promissory note tomorrow. All of it. Read it twice. Then talk to Henrik. Bryn looked at me. She did not say anything either, but she nodded. And her nod was less casual than any movement I had ever seen her make. Levi opened the front door. Wesley walked out behind us with the folder. The 3 generations my father least wanted under one roof. Wesley. Me. Holden walked back out into the cold October evening. I pulled the door shut behind us softly with my good hand, because slamming it would have meant I still wanted something from the people on the other side. I did not. The account was closed. Here is how it settled. Because I know you want to know. The trust held. My father called 2 attorneys in November. Both of them told him the same thing. Vogel. Cantrell and Hu had built the document carefully. Marguerite had been competent. The witnesses were on file. The paperwork was clean. The threats quietly stopped. My parents still live in the house in Black Mountain. Because the trust gives them a lifetime occupancy. I am not in the business of putting a sick old man on the curb. Whatever his silences cost me. But the money no longer flows. And a household that runs on someone else's deposits is just a house with bills it has to actually pay. My father took a part-time job in January as a substitute teacher at a private school in Asheville. $26 an hour. 16 hours a week. He has told the Baptist men's breakfast it is to stay in the classroom. He has told no one it is because the bank declined his auto loan application in December. Bryn read the promissory note the morning after the family dinner. She and Dustin sold the Lexus in 2 weeks. She listed the Hendersonville house in February. It sold in 8 days for $50,000 less than they had bought it for. Bryn used the proceeds to make a partial repayment on the note and to put a small down payment on a 2-bedroom rancher in West Asheville. Bryn closed Hayes Callaway Realty in March. She is currently working as a leasing agent at an apartment complex in South Asheville. She makes $22 an hour and a commission. She has not asked me for money. She sent me one text in April. It said only, "I owe you. I am going to spend the next 20 years showing you how much." I did not reply. I am not ready. But I did not delete it either. My mother left my father in February. Quietly. She did not file for divorce. She said she was too old for that paperwork, but she moved into a small apartment in Weaverville near Henrik Vogel's office, where the trust quietly pays her rent and her utilities under a provision Marguerite had written specifically for her. My mother comes for Sunday supper at our house once a month. She holds Holden in her lap, and sometimes she cries. She has apologized 11 separate times. And the 11th apology was different from the first 10, and I am beginning to believe it. Aunt Loretta told everyone the truth, exactly as I knew she would. The family chat went very quiet for a long time. Uncle Marcus comes to our house for Sunday supper every other week. He brings Wesley. Wesley brings the folder. He sets it on our bookshelf and says, "In case anybody forgets, Holden is 10 months old now. He has 4 teeth and a stuffed acorn. He will not sleep without Marguerite's last sleeper. Sits folded in his drawer. He calls Wesley Pop Pop." If there is one thing I learned from a postpartum recovery room, a folder I did not open for 13 days, 4 taps on a banking app, and 1 phone call my grandfather made on a Sunday at 5:53 p.m. It is this. The people who praise you for being the strong one are usually just naming the person they have quietly decided they will never have to carry. And the day you stop being their bank is the day you finally get to be something better, which, for me, was simply a mother to my own son. Instead of a parent to everyone who refused to grow up. That is my story. 7 years. Efolda. And the truth my whole family had buried. If this reminded you to read one statement tonight, or to write down a number you have never wanted to add up, or to check who you would actually call from a hospital discharge desk, take that as your sign and do it today. Do not wait for the C-section. Do not wait for the Sunday lunch. Do not wait for an 87-year-old man in a denim shirt to drive 41 miles with a folder he has been holding for 11 months. Make the call now, while you are still well. While the people you love most are still in a room you can walk into. If you know someone in your life who is always cast as the strong one, share this story with them. Tell them the strong one is allowed to put the folder down. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And tell me the name of the person you would call from a hospital bed. I read every one. From a kitchen in Asheville, with my son asleep in a high chair and a grandfather coming to Sunday supper, I am Emily Whitlow. And the only thing I ever needed, in the end, was the 87-year-old man who drove 41 miles through the dark with a folder under his arm and made one phone call that closed the account for good. A discharge paper is supposed to mean a patient is ready to go home. But that morning, I learned that ready is not only a medical word. A body can be cleared by the hospital and still be too weak to carry what everyone else keeps placing on it. My son's breathing had finally steadied. My bleeding had slowed. And the chart said we could leave. But the chart could not measure the weight of being abandoned by people who had spent years calling me strong in medicine. You do not treat a symptom by pretending the vital signs are fine. You look at the pattern, name the risk, and act before the damage becomes permanent. That is what I finally did with my family. I stopped confusing endurance with health. I stopped calling financial bleeding generosity. And I stopped teaching my son, by example. That love means carrying people who refuse to carry you back. The safest home I could give Holden was not one where everyone was forgiven quickly. It was one where truth was allowed to breathe. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.